should also be noted that in 1775, the British begin to take measures to uh, organize their kind of military plans as well. One of these, most notably, was to um, offer freedom to slaves that fought on behalf of the British Crown in putting down the American rebellion. Interestingly, as a response to this, Washington was forced to accept black recruits into the ranks of the Continental Army as well. Um, these African Americans served in integrated units during the war, and also some freed blacks as well served, with the exception of regiments or military contingents coming out of Georgia and South Carolina. They were African Americans were prohibited from enlisting or being a part of military formations coming out of those colonies. All in all, by the end of the war, some 5,000 African Americans had served in fighting for or on behalf of the American Revolution, on the behalf of the rebels in the Continental Army. By the second year, 1776, the British were forced to abandon uh, Boston, and they relocated eventually to New York City. They sailed into the Hudson River to link. The idea was to use New York City, which was more of a loyalist kind of base or hotbed, as opposed to Boston, and to uh, take the British Army that was newly located there and march northward along the Hudson River Valley. At the same time, there would be a British Army marching down from the St. Lawrence Seaway, and they would link up and essentially divide or isolate New England from the rest of the colonies. The belief here was that the British thought that the source of the rebellion lay in Massachusetts and the surrounding colonies, and so if it could be isolated, then it could be contained and destroyed. So that was kind of the initial uh, strategy that the British began to you know put into effect. Uh, Instead of doing this, the British under General Howe in New York decide that instead of following through with linking up with British forces coming south from Canada, they instead were going to uh, pursue General Washington's army and forces that they had just kicked out of New York City. They were going to pursue them through New Jersey and into Pennsylvania, and indeed they did so. By December of 1776, the Continental Army was demoralized. It was extremely poorly provisioned. Supplies was always a main concern for Washington. Just maintaining the army that he was in command of was really a daily kind of grind. Also, uh, the terms of enlistment for these troops under his command were due to expire at the end of the year in 1776. And so Washington is really hoping that he can rally his troops for a last ditch wintertime offensive, which was a rarity in and of itself, and basically try and boost morale to have men reenlist and carry on the war effort. That turning point does arrive in the final days of December in 1776 at the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton, in which within a week George Washington has these two decisive victories against the British forces that had been, kind of what had happened is that they were basically the army was broken up into smaller contingents in order to kind of police and patrol the countryside, and so being divided like that, Washington took the opportunity to attack smaller pieces of the British army rather than face it in the field all at the same time. The significance here of these two pivotal battles is that one, it has the desired effect that Washington wanted. The morale among the troops, rebounds, enlistments. People do re-enlist for kind of another term of service, and the Continental Army survives essentially. What's also important is that this is a kind of a domestic turning point in the war. Oftentimes with military conflicts, there's often a kind of domestic side, a domestic kind of turning point or breaking point, and a similar kind of event in international affairs that takes place to either guarantee victory or defeat, as the case may be. The turning point in which the revolution is recognized internationally comes in about a year later in 1777, in September and October specifically of that year. This happens at what's known as the Battle of Saratoga. So the British forces, having suffered the reversals in the previous winter at the Battle of Trenton and Princeton, these two separate battles, the British forces retreat back to New York, and they essentially decide that they will follow through with their original plan and link up with British forces coming down from Canada. The Americans are in a better position here at this time, in the fall of 1777, to make a stand against and prevent that from happening, that link up from happening. So in the wilds of, again, upstate New York, the British commander coming from Canada, leading his army southward, General Burgoyne, is soundly defeated in a series of conflicts, a series of battles, as he's trying to hack his way through the wilderness to get to, linking up in New York with the British Army located in moving north from New York City. Here you have an entire British army, some 5,800 troops, surrendering en masse to the American rebels. As a result, and a major general is surrendered as well. I mean, Burgoyne, has to join his men essentially. There is no real escape for any of the leadership within the army. That event is going to win the recognition of Britain's key adversary in Europe, that being France. France is going to recognize the accomplishments and the abilities of the American Revolution to sustain itself, recognize that indeed, if they're able to defeat the world's most powerful military and defeat its armies, then that this is worthy of international recognition of their rights to exist as an independent country. So it's going to widen the scope of the war for the British now. It's also going to provide as you might expect, the Americans with a great power ally, the main rival to Britain. And so, with recognition comes legitimacy, legitimacy of the United States, of Americans as, organizing themselves into a sovereign entity. Members of the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, kind of the political element that is representing this, kind of idea, this concept of American government and American independence. They send envoys to France to, conclude a formal treaty of alliance. Both sides, the French and the Americans, agree to defend the liberty of the new American Republic. Each side vowed to keep fighting until this was achieved. And they also, Americans would help defend French holdings in the Caribbean. Now that's really just kind of it's a kind of a tacit understanding or lip service. I mean, the Americans had no real way of projecting their power. They could barely do that within the 13 colonies they were trying to, in which they were trying to establish their independence. They really couldn't project power regionally beyond their own shores. Nonetheless, it was kind of an offering that that could be made. Also, neither France nor the United States could engage in and conclude a separate peace with Britain. When it came to negotiating a treaty, should this war effort be successful. As a result of these terms, France agrees to enter the war in June of 1778. The Americans here now have a great power ally, as mentioned. This means that they now have a potentially unlimited supply of war material, supplies, troops. French troops can begin to be shipped into into the 13 colonies, and also they have at their disposal the French Navy, as far as it can help in furthering the war aims of the American colonies. One key figure that comes over early on is a young French officer by the name of Marquis de Lafayette. He is made a member of General George Washington's staff, and the relationship between Lafayette and Washington is very, very strong. Lafayette himself is only 19 years old, and so in many respects this relationship is often defined as kind of a father-son like relationship. Washington had no children of his own, and so he kind of took Lafayette under his wing, and that kind of bond was kind of very important, because this is the key envoy of the French state at Washington's side, so that relationship needed to be a good one in order to make sure that this alliance was going to work, and indeed it did. When a revolutionary movement is recognized by other existing states, this means that it's going to provide a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of the world. That simply because states recognize one another means that in fact it is so. The Dutch were one of the first to recognize American independence. They weren't necessarily, and this is another state in Europe that's kind of beginning to see Americans as independent. They weren't able to really supply or provide any military support, but what the Dutch were able to provide was money in the forms of loans in order to continue effort. But it was really France's support, material and otherwise, that was going to really make American independence a reality. The prospect of the American Revolution being successful without French support, without French recognition, was minimal at best. Spain did not recognize American independence because they didn't need this new emergent state to threaten Spanish holdings in North America, specifically in Spanish held Florida and also in Spanish held territory west of the Mississippi River. So Spain did fight as an ally against England. It was allied with the French against England. So here you get an interesting kind of you know configuration of allies being allied to certain states but not wanting to ally themselves with others that want to become a state. So it's an interesting characteristic in diplomacy. For England, the expansion of the war meant that now, instead of just putting down an American rebellion, they now had to worry about being challenged globally by French and Spanish forces, and protecting their colonial holdings now well around the world. This is no longer kind of an in-house matter, kind of a matter between colonists and the British government. As a result, English war expenses ballooned. In 1775, the British government was spending about 4 million British pounds per year to conduct the war in the American colonies. By 1782, wartime expenses had proliferated to some 20 million British pounds per year. And this was money that they were doling out to conduct this war, and they hadn't paid off the last war. Their involvement in the French and Indian War and 7-Year War that ran concurrently. So Britain, as far as its financial matters were concerned, was in a shambles and increasingly getting worse. As a result of this, Britain in 1778 and from 78 to 1780 refocuses its entire approach to conducting the war in the American colonies. They basically withdraw most, if not all, of their forces from the northern colonies, and they move them southward to Charleston, South Carolina, and use that as a launching pad for conducting military campaigns that would go from these southern colonies, where there was a stronger, what they believed was a stronger loyalist kind of element, and then move their way northward through North Carolina and into Virginia, and basically roll up the colonies from south to north. They ended up perceiving the degree of hospitality that they would enjoy when the British arrived in South Carolina. Within the state itself, there's a key conflict, the Battle of Cowpens, in which there was a successful, defeat of British forces at that battle. Also, despite that reversal, the British continued to move forward into North Carolina, and in 1781 the general, the commander overseeing the British forces, Major General Charles Cornwallis, is going to continue to press northward, and he makes it into Virginia and holds up his forces at a place called Yorktown in the southern sections of the kind of extreme southern sections of what is today Virginia. And Washington realizes that he has another opportunity here to hopefully hem in Cornwallis and his army at Yorktown, besiege them, and force them into terms of surrender. And this is exactly what happens. From April to September of 1781, the British, along with the help of the French, and particularly the deployment of the French Navy, manages to organize not only a siege on land, but also a naval blockade, so that British forces in Yorktown could not be reinforced or resupplied. And so as a result, once the French Navy was successful in defending the blockade, Cornwallis had no alternative really but to surrender in the fall of 1781. Again, you have a British army here numbering some 7,000 troops having to surrender in mass to General Washington's forces. This is the turning point at which the American Revolution, for all intents and purposes, ends as far as a military conflict is concerned. The peace treaty itself is concluded in 1783, so that is when the war actually ends. There would be some more fighting in the western frontier and other places of, in between the British and the Americans, but by and large the kind of large scale battles were pretty much done and over with. The English public back in London and across the British countryside had lost their appetite for the war, so public opinion turned against the war itself, and as a result, the British are just they're essentially cutting their losses by allowing the United States, allowing the Americans to win their independence. That independence comes about in September, or on September 3rd of 1783, with what's called the Treaty of Paris. Again, it's a treaty signed in Paris. You're going to hear a lot of Treaty of Parises. So you have the Treaty of Paris of 1763, ending the French and Indian War. Here we have the Treaty of Paris of 1783, ending the American Revolution. There's going to be another Treaty of Paris when we talk about the end of World War I. So it's important to, when you're talking historically about the Treaty of Paris, it's important to put the year that you're talking about so that you can tie it to the correct conflict that it is the peace of, essentially. So in this Treaty of Paris of 1783, Britain recognized American independence. They granted territorial concessions to the United States that included, again, all lands south of the Canadian border, north of the northern border of Florida. Again, Florida was a Spanish possession at this particular time, and east of the Mississippi River. So it's the 13 colonies that won their independence, but the land that is being conceded here extends well beyond those the borders of those 13 colonies. British forts in the western portions, particularly the upper Mississippi Valley, were to be vacated and handed over to the Americans. And indeed, after the war, the British troops left the 13 states, now as they were called. Loyalists also exited the new United States. As many as 100,000 people that were loyal to the British cause left when the British forces made their exit. Many slaves also went with the British. In South Carolina, as many or as much as one third of the slave population in that state was relocated to Canada or back to Europe. They were confiscated as contraband during the American Revolution by British forces, and British officials, diplomats, were going to they facilitated their emigration under the terms of the Treaty of Paris. Slave owners were to be compensated for the loss of this property, but this stipulation, this term of the treaty, as well as the vacating of British forces or the British from forts in the Upper Mississippi Valley, were not honored as part of the final piece, the final terms of the Treaty of Paris. So, which would lead to additional conflicts, the War of 1812 among them, basically a generation later. So attention begins to shift almost immediately from successfully winning a war to now governing these new 13 states and this new republic, as it called itself, in not only international affairs but also obviously domestic affairs as well. The Continental Congress basically was reorganized into under what was called the Articles of Confederation, not wanting to now being free of a monarchical kind of form of government, with any kind of a dominant centralized authority. The states, Americans, were loath to create a new kind of centralized governing authority, and so therefore they originally organized themselves under a confederate-like system of government. So the bulk of political power under the Articles of Confederation lay within the states themselves, the 13 states. There were very few laws on the books that would govern all 13 states as a whole, and even though there was a unitary kind of congressional body to which state representatives were elected to kind of resemble a federal-like structure, it really had no authority. The states could either veto legislation that was trying to be put in place for all 13 states. If one state vetoed it, it was the bill, the proposal was defeated. So the states had that kind of power at their disposal. States printed their own money, they raised their own taxes, they could tax imports that were coming in from foreign sources, and so it was very difficult to manage affairs of state in kind of especially with regard to the international order and with international relations in any way, because there was no real central authority with which states could negotiate. That system of government was not well suited for the needs of the citizens of the United States, nor for the interests of the United States. And so very quickly, the leading members of the American Republic realized that there needed to be a revision, a recasting of the political order in this new country of theirs. So they began to hold meetings, convene meetings. The most notable of these was in Philadelphia in 1787. The Constitutional Convention takes place in September, or actually in the summer of that year, and by mid-September, this Constitutional Convention, which was designed initially to kind of revamp the Articles of Confederation, actually ended up reinventing the entire system of government, leading to the Constitution itself, the Constitution by which our country operates today. So you have, a much more kind of organized, a much more centralized form of government as far as it having a executive, legislative, and judicial branch. The states, are represented within the federal structure, and there's an effort to try and balance power between the central government and the states. But for the interests of the United States as a whole, there is kind of a greater deference paid to kind of the centralized government, the federal government. So that, and of course it's General George Washington who is elected unanimously, the only president to be elected unanimously in the Electoral College, to become the first president of this newly reorganized United States under this new system of government, the constitutional system. That happens in 1789, and it really is from there on that you have the establishment of this early republic. That gets us to, and also I should mention that in that same year, 1789, is when the revolution in France erupts. And as that revolution begins to take on different aspects, as it changes from being kind of more of a more radicalized, essentially, then the attitudes of Americans across the political order, but also across the social order among the rank and file members of American society, are going to either continue to support the French Revolution, or begin to express their, hesitation and in some cases condemnation of what was happening, and the amount of radicalization and bloodshed that was eventually, affecting French government and the French social and political order. That's where we're going to focus attention after we talk about the Industrial Revolution. We'll also be talking about the French Revolution as well. Okay, so hopefully this helps you kind of understand a little bit more the aspects of the American Revolution, the significant turning points, and also efforts to organize itself to kind of represent itself in the on the world stage. So stay tuned and keep try and keep up with these lectures. All right, talk to you soon.